Voice is slow. Hold on. How is it now? It's okay. Can you check? Can you hear me now? No change. Let's check your speakers. Too low. Everybody has the same problem. Same issue for everybody? Ah. How is it now? Okay. Okay. Okay, let's start. We're going to see Apache installation and integration. And we'll also see OHS. I tried to include it later. Once we know Apache, OHS is much simpler. But if we directly go ahead with OHS, it might sound like you're missing something still. So we will have Apache and also OHS. Also OHS we will have later. We just have to install OHS, and integration of OHS is pretty easy compared to Apache, because Oracle HTTP server, it comes in built with everything. So we'll see Apache first. So now before we go into installation and the technicalities, let's see why you need it. Why we need Apache server? Anybody? Anybody? Why we need Apache server? The web server. That's correct. Apache server is the web server. Now why we need a web server? It's for the static contents. That's correct. It's for the static content. Usually between the load balancer and the application server, you want to have a web tier which can take care of the static content requests. So here the load balancer will redirect to the Apache. Apache again has to redirect among the app servers. Now to do that redirection, Apache uses what is called a proxy plugin. I think we have seen it in clustering when we talked about it. A software load balancer kind of thing. If I had to open that one, let me open. This one. Yeah. So here you have users accessing, then the router, 100 requests. The web server here we are talking is Apache server, the green box. The Apache server first serves any static content, means if there is a HTML page request or image request, the web server directly picks it from the hard disk and gives it to the browser. But if there is a request for a dynamic content, which means the backend app server has to serve it, then web server uses what is called a proxy plugin, the yellow box. The proxy plugin is something that we have to configure. Now using the proxy plugin, The web server acquires the capability to load balance. So the proxy plugin is nothing but it's a small file that gives the web server additional capacity. What's that capacity? The capacity to load balance across the WebLogic servers and the capacity to talk to WebLogic servers. So the proxy plugin here is provided by WebLogic. Oracle provides that proxy plugin. It comes as a small file. That file we have to configure for web server. Once we configure that file for web server, the web server requires the capability. Alright. So we are going to do it in two stages. Stage 1, we're going to install web server. We're going to start it and stop it. Then stage 2, we will configure the proxy plugin. Alright. So stage 1 is purely Apache installation. So that's what your document here says. First thing, you're going to install. Second thing, you're going to configure. Now the installation itself, we're going to do it from the source code. Because Apache is open source software, you will do the installation from the source code. Now the installation steps from the source code are in this document. Now I have uploaded this document already, so make sure you download it and keep it open when you're when we are doing it. So then let's come back. Then we're going to change certain configuration settings here. Okay, now before we go any further, let me install it. So I'm going to follow this document. Alright, and install Apache server. Now first things first, you will download this tar.gz file from apache.org. So you can directly go to Google, download http apache httpd server. Alright, if you go, you will directly get a download page, download.cgi page, alright, from the apache.org. If you go in there, you will see this release 2.4.7 or 2.2.26, anything is okay. Alright, so let's say we are doing it 2.2.26 because many people are still using 2.2 version. 2.4 you can use, it's pretty much the same thing. So 2.2.26, let's say. Now when you say 2.2.26, click on it, it will take you to the location. This is the source, httpd 2.2.26.tar.gz. Alright, you can click on the source, you will be able to download it. So the download is happening at tar.gz. So I think, let's say I copy the link, I go to the Unix box. Now I can transfer that file to Unix box using WinSCP or something. Alright, so here I am. I can transfer that file, or I'm going to download it again using wget, using the link. It will be direct download on the Unix box. Wget is a command to get a file, so you can get I just took the link of that tar.gz file and I used wget command, so my file is on this box. So now I have this tar.gz. So let's follow this. So you're going to unzip it, extract it. Step 1. So z unzip. The unzip is done. Now you have a tar file. star xvf. The xvf command will extract the file. So it extracted it. Now you have a directory. Alright. So go into that directory. Apache is pretty simple, means this is a source code based installation. This is not just for Apache. Any source code based installation, it follow the same steps. Now that you have extracted this directory, so this is where you are 2.2.26. You are doing it in 3 steps now. Your source code is ready in this directory. The first thing you will do is you will configure it. Then you compile it using make command. Then you install it. These are the 3 things you are doing. Configuring means, because we know that this software is for a Unix system. When we downloaded it, the source code was for Unix, isn't it? So when we say Unix source code, it's in C. So the Unix source code is common for all Unix systems, means Solaris, HP, IBM, Linux, everything, it's pretty much same. So when you do a configure, the configure script comes along with your installation. So here, look at this one. This is the configure script we are talking. In the directory that we have extracted, you have a configure script. This script, using that script, the first thing you're going to do is you will configure everything for this directory. This is where you are trying to install Weblogic. Sorry, install Apache server. So you will configure all the source code, all the files. There are configuration files. Some of these are. You'll configure all these files for this directory. Then you compile the source code, because it's written in C. You need to compile it. Then finally you install the compiled code. So configure, make install. Those are the 3 things that every source code based installation uses. So I'm going to use configure hyphen prefix equal to /home /encode IT. Configure hyphen prefix equal to let's say under WL Apache we are installing. That's where it's going to. So the Apache home is going to be. This is going to be your Apache home. Now configure our source code for this Apache home. The Apache home need not be there. It's just a configuration. The directory gets created in the 3rd step. Now when it is configuring, it basically validates whether all the required files are there or not. That's what configuration means. You see that checking for something, checking for some. It validates whether all the required header files are there in this system or not. Alright, so your configuration is done. If there are any issues, it will exit. Now your source code is configured for this system. Then you do a make. Means you compile it. compilation is taking too long. You see, the compiler uses a GCC compiler, GNU C compiler. That should be there on your system already. Right, so compilation is done. Now your source code is compiled. Go to this final step. Install, make install. So we just executed the third step in the document, make install. Now these three steps, configure, make install, they are same for all source code based installation. All source code based installation. Okay, so the installation is done. So you have your Apache server in the directory you mentioned. You see this thing here. You see the mkdars, everything here. So basically, during the last stage, it created this Apache directory under this. So that's our Apache home. So in here, you have Apache directory, which is this. Get in there. These are Apache installation. Now in the Apache installation, there are a couple of files that are important. One is conf. Conf is the directory where all the configuration related stuff is there. And out of all the configuration related stuff, httpd.conf is the most important file. Like it's config.xml for Weblogic. For Apache, it's httpd.conf file. So all the configuration of Apache had to be done in this file only. Apart from that, you have a bin directory. This is where, just like Weblogic, Apache bin also will have all the startup shutdown scripts. So here we're going to use Apache CTL, Apache control it's called, to start and stop the Apache server. The next thing, you got htdocs. This is where the static content goes. You have a default index.html because we are saying Apache is for static content, right? So the static content has to be put somewhere. That's put into htdocs directory. It's called document root. Apart from that, you have logs directory, important one. You will have a couple of logs here later. One is access log, other one is error log. So these are the four important directories of Apache installation. So you have conf where httpd.conf is there, bin where Apache CTL is there, htdocs where you extract your files, logs is where the logs file is there. The proxy plugin that we're going to put in later is going to come into modules directory because that is considered as a module, additional module of Apache. So let's go ahead, configure it and then start it from this directory. So let's conf. For the configuration of Apache, you're going to perform these things. General information, general configuration of Apache. We are not configuring the plugin now. We are simply trying to start Apache server and make sure it's running. Then we will go to the configuration of proxy plugin. First thing, make sure you put up your lesson address properly. Lesson port 80 or 8080 anything. You give a server name. Now when you are giving this port number, obviously we know that 1 to 1023 are privileged port, which means if you give 80 port, you need to have root privileges to start Apache server. So what we usually do is the Apache itself will go on 8080 port, the next popular one, and people can do a DNS redirection like we're going to show here. This one. This is a DNS. What DNS says is if the request comes to port number 80, send it to 8080. That kind of redirection can be done and Apache can be started on port number 8080. So actually Apache is running on 8080 and DNS is the one that is redirecting the request. Anything coming on to 80 to 8080. So here These are the configurations that we're going to do in Apache httpd.conf file. So take a backup before we do that. Open the file and make very slight modifications. Now this is a text file, not an XML file. So I'm coming down on this text file. Follow the cursor. It's not mandatory. Normally the general port is 80. So that's the reason we are saying that. We're going to change the port number to something else. See here, it's listen 80. So we're going to change it to 8080. Listen address. That's the only change you have to do at this point. There is another change. If you come down, you will see the other change is server name. This is server admin. You can give your email ID so that if there are any errors with Apache, they will be mailed to you. So this is another thing that you have to change. So remove this command line, give the IP port 192.168.128.6. Port number that we are using is 8080. That's it, only these two settings at this point. The proxy plugin related configurations we're going to do later. At this point our purpose is only to configure Apache and just bring it up. So with those two changes, save it, close the file. You're ready to start the server. So let's start the server. Go into bin directory. Use Apache CTL. You have three commands: stop, start, or restart. Any of these three you can use depending on the requirement. Out of these three, I'm going to start. That's it. Your Apache server started. Now you can check whether it started using a couple of ways. One is, if it is Weblogic, we used to do ps-ef grep Java. If it is Apache, you're going to do ps-ef grep for httpd. You will see 6 processes: httpd, 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 like this. Now if you see the parent process ID of all these things, the first one is started by 1. Everything else is started by the first one, 18411. You see this number, parent process ID, and the parent process ID for the rest of 5 is same. Means first it starts one daemon, everybody else starts from that daemon, and these 6 daemons together is called your Apache server. And the Apache CTL command controls all the 6 daemons. Because it's a C-based program, you don't have a thread model kind of setup. So these 6 processes will try to divide the work among themselves. Alright. Another way of checking it is to go into the log file. Now let's go into logs directory. You see 2 log files, important log files: access log, error log. Just make sure there are no errors. Go into errors log file. So this is just a message. Notice it says Apache 2.2.26 resuming normal operation. Just make sure there are no errors in this file. Just notices or anything else. So your Apache server is running. Now we're going to send a request to the Apache server, and Apache server will respond. Now when Apache server request is made, let's say we are sending a request for index.html page. This is the page that will be given to us when we talk to Apache server. And where is Apache server running? Which port? 8080. You can see that port on this box. Grep 8080. So 8080 is the Apache listening. Alright. So I'm going to send a request to Apache server. 192.168.128.6 /index index.html. You see, this is the default page. It says it works. You can see it on the page itself. htdocs. You're in htdocs. If you do a cat on index.html, that's the page. It works. You can edit this page. vi, let's say instead of it works, we say code it.in. Alright, save it, close it, go back to the browser, refresh it. You see this? This is a new page. So every time a request is made, Apache goes to the hard disk and fetches the page. So now we know Apache is working. Means we have downloaded Apache, we have installed Apache. That's not what we are interested in. We are interested in integrating Apache with Weblogic. Now if you have in your project, if there is any content, static content, the static content gets extracted here. That's the only way, that's the only thing you do with Apache. Means you shut down Apache, you extract a zip file given to you by the developer, you bring it up again. That's Apache deployment. Then you have Proxy Plugin configuration. So now what we have to do is, we have a setup like this. So this is our setup. So this is the backend we have. Alright, let's say this is one WebLogic server, this is another WebLogic, third, fourth, four WebLogic servers we have. Or to be much more precise, let's use the box 1, box 2, because our domain spreads across two boxes. So you got manage server 1 here, manage server 2, manage server 3, manage server 4. So what we are doing here is, you can have a separate box here, have Apache installed over there and redirect the request. Or what we are doing here is, we have Apache here. The proxy plugin is what you're going to configure. The proxy plugin, in the proxy plugin, you will give the details of all WebLogic servers. So it can redirect here, it can redirect here, it can redirect here, or it can redirect here, anywhere. Oops. Anywhere it can redirect. Alright, this is the architecture we are trying to get. So before we redirect anything, so our methodology is like this, because we know there is a MedRec application everywhere. So we're going to use the MedRec application to do the entire testing. So MedRec. So just make sure MedRec is available everywhere. Now this box is currently not available. So left side box. So we're going to leave that one aside. So our testing, everything happens on this box. So let's make sure the MedRec is available on both these forms. The first thing you're going to do is, you'll make sure the URL on both the managed servers is accessible. Means the application 6, let's say, I think we are using, what's the port number we are using? Anybody remembers it? 12,001? 20,000. Cool. So 20,001 for admin, 20,010 for managed server, and if you are using MedRec, then MedRec. The same way for the second managed server, 192.168.128.6, 20,020 Med. These are individual managed server URLs. So we will make sure the MedRec application is accessible. Now what we want is, we don't want the end user to directly access this URL. Instead, we want to access MedRec page on Apache. So if the request hits here, the Apache should realize that, oh, this is a dynamic content request, so it should redirect to the backend available servers. So our final URL that we should be able to use after the proxy configuration is Apache URL. So IP of Apache, port number of Apache, but the page that we are requesting will still be same. Now ideally in a real situation the Apache server will be on a different box, so the IP of Apache will be different, but the page Medrec page still remains same. But here if you observe, Apache does not know anything about Medrec. If it sees that there is a Medrec page, it has to realize point number one, it has to realize that this is a dynamic content request. Point number two, it has to redirect. Now both those things we're going to tell to Apache. How does it realize that it's a dynamic request? Where to send it to the backend. Both those configurations we are going to give during the proxy plugin configuration. So I'm going to save it. Oops. Okay. This is the diagram we are following. Now let's go ahead and configure the proxy plugin. Now the configuration of proxy plugin, again we have simplified it very much. These are the three steps that we're going to use for proxy plugin configuration. I simplified extremely this one so that you don't feel like it's too much work. It's a very simple thing that we're going to do. Just now I was telling, for the Apache to redirect, it has to know about two things. Point number one, it has to know how to detect static content versus dynamic content. Point number two, it has to know what are the backend servers where it can send it. That's it, only those 2 points. When to send it and where to send it. That's it. Now those 2 points will be put into what is called an if module. So we're going to add this additional if module which is WebLogic related. In this if module you will see when to send it and where to send it. When to send it is through match expression. Means it uses this match expression rule that we have given. It matches the incoming URL with, let's say, star. If the incoming URL matches the rule that you have given, it's dynamic content. For example, if you say match expression star.jsp, so what Apache server does is whenever there is an incoming request, it will match that URL with the expression that you have given. It's a regular expression. Now if it matches, it has to send it to the backend. Now what is the backend? You can define the backend here. If the backend is only one server, you can do it by WebLogic host, WebLogic port. But if the backend is multiple servers, you can define it using a tag called WebLogic cluster. Then you give the list of managed servers with the IP port separated by colon. So what you have is, for those 2 steps, only one if module. The match expression also goes into the same if module. So here, if module, in the if module, you're going to give the match expression, and also you're going to give WebLogic cluster. That's it. The match expression tells you how to distinguish static versus dynamic content, and the WebLogic cluster tells where to go. Now to do this entire thing, Apache requires an additional thing which is called a proxy plugin. Now the proxy plugin is this one. mod underscore WL underscore 22.so. This is a file given to us by Weblogic. Means Weblogic, we have to go to the Weblogic support site and download this .so file. Now once you downloaded it, the .so file has to be put into Weblogic underscore modules directory, and then add this entry to httpd.conf. All these entries you are making in httpd.conf only. So you will do a load module, which is basically telling Apache server to load it module. Then you are creating a if module. In the if module, you have two things: how to distinguish, where to go. So these are the two steps I'm going to do: load module and then if module. That means my configuration is done. But before I go ahead with this configuration, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure the WebLogics are actually accessible. Otherwise, we will not be able to access the Mandrake page even from Apache. So the backend server should be capable of serving the request. So I'm going to go to our server and check the deployments first thing. Make sure the deployments are directly accessible, which means I'm going to make sure these two URLs are directly accessible. Then I'll come to the configuration. I'm going to do it a little quickly. Oracle middleware user projects domains. So let's log into the console. We will check whether the deployments are there or not. If they are not there, we will deploy it. WLS admin 1 to 3. One, go to deployment. It's not there, so we will delete it. We'll do a deployment. It's taking too long again. Okay. Application deployed. Now let me use a script to deploy it. I think we have written scripts, right? So let's use a deploy.sh script. Okay, deployment done. You will see this exception because none of the targets are available. So we're going to bring up the servers. Start mng1.sh, start mng2.sh. Between 1 and 2, just give a couple of a minute's time. Usually you can theoretically start all the servers at a time, but in practice just give a 10-15 seconds gap. If you start all of them at a time, the admin will choke. Let's look at the log file. Let's make sure the server is up, and we will check both the URLs. Okay, anyway, while this comes up, let's go ahead with that configuration. Let's look at configuration, what we are trying to do. We're trying to do two things, simple things. One is make this entry. Second one, create if module. Both these things in httpd.conf file. But because we are going to make this entry, first thing we're going to do is we're going to copy this .so file to modules directory of your Apache home. So I will open another session here. Code IT. Alright, so our mod file is in here, a .so file. This is the file that we want to copy to our own location. Let's say this is a location, home and code IT, students, WL online. This is where we want to copy this directory, this file to current directory. So I have my .so file somewhere, this one. I need this file to go into Apache home modules. So I'm going to move this file into Apache modules directory. So let's go to that directory. So you have copied that file. Alright, so step 1 is done. So I have copied this file. Now I just have to open the httpd.conf file and make this entry. The file is already there. So let's open up the file, conf file, vi httpd.conf. Now you don't have to remember any of the syntaxes. I'm going to the beginning of the file, come down, you will see load module entry. You just copy paste that syntax. I'm coming down, just searching for load module. Here we go. So this is a sample syntax. Copy paste that line. You got Weblogic underscore module is modules mod underscore WL underscore 22.so. This is the file just now we copied, and it's under modules directory. It takes Apache home by default, so you don't have to give that location. So here under modules mod underscore WL underscore 22.so. Alright, so that load module is done. So the next thing is you have to create an if module. In the if module there are two things: how to distinguish static dynamic, where to go. That's it. So I'm going to create an if module. Let's go back. So I'm going to copy paste an existing if module. So let's say this is the beginning of the if module. Copy it, paste it. This is the end of if module. YYP, that's what I'm using, yanking and pasting. VI if module. So let's make the modifications according to our requirement. This is all copy paste stuff. So if module mod underscore weblogic.c, mod underscore weblogic.c. Two things I'm giving: match expression. In our case, for testing, we're sending everything to the backend, but in real time you will have something like this. All GSP's pages should go to the backend. Means if the URL matches the expression, it will go to the backend. In our case, I'm sending everything to the backend. Means Apache is simply being used as a load balancer here. Once the match expression is done, you got Weblogic cluster. Now give the list of managed servers. Now the Weblogic cluster tag you are seeing, this is only Apache reference. It is not necessary that the backend servers have to be in a Weblogic cluster. It's not mandatory. Even if the servers are in a regular standalone servers, you will still use WebLogic cluster. What it means is Apache server has a group of servers to which it has to send the request to. It has nothing to do with whether the WebLogic server is in cluster or not. It does not matter. So you're going to give a list of IP port numbers separated by comma. You can give any IP port numbers. The Apache server will check their availability. Let's say we have only 1 and 2 servers up, but we can also include all the servers. No issues. Let's say this is 7, which is not available. You can give all the servers wherever you want the request to be redirected. So Apache server now will try to direct the request to all the servers in a round robin fashion. So first request will go to the first server, second request to the second server, like that. Last IP is, it's not wrong, that's the way we want it, isn't it? We can give the IPs or the managed servers which are not available. Oh, was it 11 or 23? I think, is it the second box? What is wrong then? 192 sorry, I got it. Yeah, 192 168 128.7. Cool. So now you have given 2 important pieces of information: how to detect static versus dynamic. Once it detects, where to send it. Now if you have only one WebLogic server on the backend, you will use usually this tag: host 192.168.128.6 WebLogic port. I'll say 20,001. That's another way of doing it. Or even if you have one server, you can still use WebLogic cluster, give only one that server. That's enough. So I'm going to comment these things. Alright, this is not required. You can delete it or you can comment it. I'm going to comment it. So my proxy plugin configuration is done. I'm done with proxy plugin configuration. My managed server stopped at admin mode. See this thing? Let's see, I think that data source has failed. DS2 was failed. DS2, DS1 failed because, see this thing, the network adapter could not establish a connection. It could not establish a connection to the database because our database is down. So because the database is down, the data sources could not be started on the managed servers. If the data sources could not be started on the managed servers, it will stop at admin mode. So we have only one choice now: shut down or kill these servers, bring up the database, and then start the servers. So mng2 I'm going to kill -9. The same way kill mng, this is ADM, mng1. So I have killed both the servers. Start the database. Alright, start the listener. Alright, so the listener is up. We're ready to go. Now start the servers. Start mng1. Start mng2. coming up. You see there is an error here, unable to connect to the GMS destination. The application that we have deployed is looking for some destinations. This is basically a queue. The name of the queue is COM-BA Medrex GMS patient notification queue. That's one queue that application is looking for. It's a warning. See, when your server is coming up, you should keep looking at all these kinds of errors. Sometimes you can ignore the errors, sometimes you cannot. So this time we are ignoring this error because we have nothing to do with this thing. But in real time, you cannot ignore this error. You need to fix this. Fixing such errors requires help from the developer. There's nothing wrong with sitting with developer. Developers are your best friends. You sit with the developer, see what this error, try to either say that it's no need to fix this or fix it. This is one practice that we usually do after initial build deployment. Now, as an administrator, you don't leave these kind of errors. The developers may say that it's okay, but what you usually do is you want to keep your logs clean. So once the project stabilizes, the next thing that we usually do is when things get normal, we list out all these errors. This is one practice I always do in every project. You list out all these regular errors that we are seeing in the log files. We send it to the developer. We ask them whether these errors are can be ignored or they need to be looked at. Now so usually the developers say, okay, you can ignore them. Now what we ask them is, in the next upcoming builds, try not to display this error or fix this error. So usually after a couple of builds, once we put this request, so obviously your developers are not going to accept that request. You need to put some pressure from the managers. So once it is done, these kind of ignorable errors will disappear from your logs and your logs will be much cleaner. So that's one thing that you usually do. You don't want to see unnecessary errors in the log files. Alright, so your servers are in running mode. Sorry. Now let's look at these two URLs. Let's hit the two URLs directly. Make sure our Medrec is accessible. Then we're going to hit the URL from Apache. 192.168.128.6 20,010/Medrec. Something went wrong. IP. This thing. Right. So this is the base. So we know that managed server 1 is responding. The same way we want to know managed server 2 is responding. So change the port number to 20,020. So managed server 2 is also responding. So we know that both the managed servers on the back end are good. Now what we have to do is we have to hit the URL from the front end. Before we do that, we have made the changes to the configuration file. So I'm going to restart that server. Apache CTL restart. Whenever you restart the Apache server, make sure you check the timestamp. It started at 5:33. It has to be same. Sometimes what happens is you give this Apache CTL restart, nothing really gets restarted, or not even an error message shows up here, which means your Apache is pretty much never restarted. So that's one problem you will see in real time, because Apache servers or the front-end servers, they take heavy load and they stop responding sometimes. Now if you see that even after restart you're not seeing the latest timestamps, then you have to kill these servers manually using kill-9. So once you kill it, then you start it normal. So always make it a habit, like you check ps-ef httpd, check the timestamp, make sure the timestamp is recent one just now. That's a very important check you have to make in real time. Otherwise you will come into problems saying that Apache was never restarted. If the Apache is not restarted, you're going to have problems. Alright, so once that is done, there is another command in Apache CTL -v that will give you the version of Apache. This is a common question in your interviews: how do you find the Apache version? There's another way of finding Apache version. You got httpd in the same file, in the same directory. That also gives the same, this thing. Say this httpd or Apache CTL. You can use anything with a version. Apache CTL -v, that's for version. httpd -v, that's for version. Anything, they both are same. Alright, so once you have restarted the server, now you're good to go. Now what we are trying to do is 6 daemon process. Yes, that's a constant number. You can change that number if you want. We can change that number. There's internal configuration file, the number of process. There's a parameter in one of the internal files. You can change the number of files if you want, the daemons. So now that we have restarted Apache server, our Apache server is ready to use the proxy plugin. Now let's ask Apache server for the madrak page. 8080. We are asking for madrak. If I get this page, it means my proxy plugin configuration is correct and it's working. So I'm going to hit enter. I can see the page, which means my Apache has redirected the request to the backend. You can actually see it in the log file. Go to the log files, cd logs. Where are the log files? Now one more thing, you will see access log, error log. The names of the log files are always going to be same. Any HTTP server, you will see access log, error log. That's a nice thing to know. Now if you check this access log, you'll be able to see the redirection is not shown here. If there are errors, you will see the redirection is not happening. Now in the access log, especially if you look at all 200 errors, 200 error code is successful. Anything other than 200 you should not see is 404. You see this thing, this is a 404 error, means page cannot be displayed. This is not something that you want, or you don't want 500 errors, which are internal server errors. You want to see 200s, 300s, that's it. If you see a 400, make sure it's a proper error. See this one, the 404 is actually for index 1. Obviously the URL, incoming URL is wrong. We don't have any page with index 1. That's a 404. So you will see 404s also, because the incoming URL may be wrong sometimes. Otherwise you should see always 200s. 200 is a successful hit. Then you can also look for error log file. See this thing. This is what is an error here. Client 8 it's trying to get an image from the backend host. This is the host it's trying to reach. See this one, this host is not available. Got exception, connection refused. So it went there, it could not get a connection, so switched on to the next one. Like that. Error connecting to the host, this thing. Like that. Alright, so you will see, make sure you don't have any errors, or for that matter any problem with Apache server. You always come down to these two log files. These are your life saviors. Anything goes wrong, you come here. So that's your Apache server. Now that Apache is running, I'm going to kill the backend servers. So I have two servers, encode mng1, mng2. As long as at least one of these two is running, Apache will work. I'm going to kill the first one. Encode mng1 is what I'm going to kill. So this is the process ID of encode mng1. Kill -9. Kill. Just make sure it's killed. So the 2 is available, admin is available, but 1 is not. Now hit the URL. Now if you hit the URL, you will still get a page because the second managed server is still available. Alright. Make sure sometimes you might be getting it from the cache, but ideally you should clear the cache also. So one server down, it's still accessible, let's say. Now I'm going to bring down the other server. Once we bring down the other server, it should not be accessible anymore. But I'm going to kill -9, the process ID of encode mng2, which is this. Insert ps-nef grep java. So this is only admin is available. Now if I hit the same URL, reload the space, let's say, reload. Now it should not be accessible anymore because Apache will try to go to the backend. None of the backend servers are available. And then you will see the bridge failure notification. A failure of Apache bridge, this is the most popular error message, which means the backend servers are not reachable to Apache. Either the backend servers are down or for some reason they are not reachable. One of these two reasons. So when all the servers go down, Apache bridge will fail. If at least one of the servers is available, Apache will simply redirect the request, rotates among them. Alright, so that's your Apache configuration. Any questions? Any questions? I'm trying to introduce SSL for Apache. So we will do Apache SSL and Weblogic SSL also. That's one thing that you will commonly come across. All static content, yes, it needs to be placed under htdocs. If you don't want to place it under htdocs, means you want to change this to some other directory, you can change it in the configuration file. So if you go to configuration file, httpd.conf, the htdocs is defined in the configuration file as document root. If I change the document root to some other location and extract it, but usually this is the location you want to place it. Now, why you want to change it, unless you have a specific reason. Otherwise you will always extract your files into htdocs direction. Do Weblogic install comes with its own web server? No. Weblogic can act as a web server. There is no separate web server itself. You can put the HTML pages onto the Weblogic itself, just like a WAR file. It will serve it. Means Weblogic can be used as a web server. There is no separate web server that comes along with Weblogic. Weblogic itself is a web server in that case. You don't need Apache. You just put that static content and then deploy it. Weblogic will serve it. Error log files. This is the error log file. What are we looking here? OHS we will do later. Towards the end, as an additional topic, we will do it. We'll go with the regular flow, then we'll come back to the additional topics later. Errors, these are the errors. These are some of the errors you will see. The genuine errors. It says backend is not available. Of course, backend, this is not available. 192.168.128.7 is not available because you got two servers. But in WebLogic cluster, you have given 4 URLs, which means before it through this error, bridge failure, it has to go through all the 4 IP ports. Once it realizes none of the 4 are available, then only it has to show the bridge failure. And that's this entry. It says 20 is not available, then 10 is not available. Then your 610 is not available, 620 is also not available. That's errors. So it went through all the 4 URLs. It realized none of them are available. Yes.
Anil, this is Dinesh.
Yes.
I have a question. Like you just said, like we can host static contents on the Weblogic server and we don't require Apache, right?
Right.
So in that case, the main thing we use to Apache is one for 2 reasons. One for static content and load balancing, right?
Right. That's
instead we can have a load balancer configure either a software or hardware, and we can directly host a static content on web server and completely remove Apache, right?
Yeah, you can do that. If you want to do that, you can. That's perfectly fine. But that's what we always say. I think I was giving one example, recruiting a BTech guy for data entry operation.
Okay.
So we don't want to do that.
Right.
Anil Prasad here.
Yes, Prasad.
Yeah, in web server not mentioned what is the primary managed instance and what is the secondary one.
There is no
So
primary, secondary. There is a primary.
For load balance purpose. Okay, for load balance purpose.
It's round robin. It's round robin. We have primary, secondary in clustering. That is when HTTP session replication is enabled, and that will be taken care by Weblogic. That has nothing to do with Apache.
Okay.
Apache simply has a 4 managed servers list that we have given. It simply does a round robin among those 4. Now once the request reaches, let's say, first server, if clustering is enabled, if HTTP session replication is enabled at WebLogic level, then WebLogic will do that primary, secondary. Wherever the request landed, that's primary, so it will choose a secondary based on replication group. It will try to replicate it. Both the information will be put into a cookie and sent back to Apache. That's all done by WebLogic. For Apache, it simply rotates the request across those 4 servers. That's cool.
At the same time, we have any parameters in the hd.config?
Any parameters in?
Like timeouts. I'm seeing the console Apache bridge. You try to connect 10 minutes and 10 seconds like that.
Yeah, you can configure all those things. Keep alive time you can configure. Keep alive timeout. There's one parameter. Where is it? You will configure it in the if module itself. There are a couple of parameters you can configure actually. If you see here, if you have if module here, right? So you can have keep alive timeout. That's one thing you can configure. Let's say 30 seconds you want to put in. Then you can configure debug. You can put it on it when you're having a problem and trying to debug. Keep alive. Keep ALIVE. Yeah, there are certain parameters you can configure. Usually these two are the most popular ones. I think keep alive, something is wrong with this one. The parameter name is something else, but this is where you will configure in the if module. and you can configure debug on also. Does that answer your question? Steps are same for configuring multiple Apache servers? Yes, exactly same. Normally you can actually bundle the Apache home, take it to your next box, extract it, and then start the servers. When you have debug on, the log files will be in debug mode. Means you will see much more information if there is any. Means in the logs that you have here, these logs will show more information. That's usually used for troubleshooting. Otherwise, you don't set up debug on. Means let's say you have a problem, but there is nothing being shown in the log files. Then you enable debug. Try to see if there is any additional information in the log files. One Apache server for one box is what we have now. You can have multiple Apache servers also. All that you have to do is create a separate Apache home here, like this. So you will have Apache 1, Apache 2, Apache 3. That's one way you can have, or else internally also you can have multiple Apache configuration files. So same Apache home you can use. Alright, under conf directory you will have HTTP D1, 2, 3. That's one way of doing it. It's a little complicated or confusing. Instead, what many people do is they set up multiple Apache homes. So Apache home, I just take a tar or take a copy, make it Apache 1, take a copy up, make it Apache 2. So go to http d.conf file and then change the port number. That way it can be done. So it's not necessary that only one Apache per box. You can have multiple Apaches per box. The port number conflict will be there. That's something that you should take care of. Yeah, I think Prasad, you were asking something.
Yeah, regarding set renewal process, like I'm here about like a 1024 something 2048 sets.
SSL certificates, okay.
Yeah, so are you going to explain that one also?
Yes, after SSL we will come to that certificates of HTTP again. We have to know what is SSL, why we want SSL, all that stuff. We'll do it for Weblogic and we'll also do for Apache. Apache usually I don't do that, but I'll include it this time.
Can we configure virtual hosts
In
as
Apache?
part of?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, in Apache we can do it, but I'm not able to get you a scenario. But like if you have, if you want to create a virtual host within that WebLogic module.
No. Why would you want to do that? Virtual hosting is a part of Apache.
Just I'm getting a scenario. Like if you deploy different applications on WebLogic.
That virtual host is in Weblogic. You have to create Weblogic virtual host. That needs to be done from Weblogic console, not in Apache. Apache will send it to the managed server. The managed server will take that request and send it to the corresponding virtual host. So you have to create virtual hosts on Weblogic. So you will open up separate ports for that one, and so you will have multiple virtual hosts on a single WebLogic server. Let's say MNG1 we have, encode MNG1. On the encode MNG1 we can create a virtual host like VH1, VH2. Each virtual host will have its own port number. So you have managed server listening on 3 different ports: 20,010, 20,050, 20,060, let's say. So 20,050, 20,060 are virtual ports. They are actually virtual hosts. Now in the Apache server that we are configuring here, the WebLogic cluster parameter that we'll have, it will also include the virtual host. So Apache does not know that it's a virtual host. It simply sends it to IP port. The IP port is actually on the same encode MNG1. So encode MNG1 is actually listening on 3 different port numbers. It can listen a request that's coming on any of those ports. Use it. Usually a virtual hosting is used to optimize the resource utilization. Let's say you have 10 different applications but none of them are really loaded. So what you do is you have a single JVM, 10 virtual hosts, each virtual host with a different port number. Application is deployed to the virtual host. So from an outsider, when they look at it, they think that each of them is having a separate IP port, a separate, that's why it's called a virtual host. So all that configuration that you suggested can be done in WebLogic. Apache itself has such a configuration. Normally a single Apache server can host lots of websites. That's what we will do in real time, shared based. If you want to host a website, there are hundreds of websites that are hosted on the same Apache server, like Encode IT that we have. The Encode IT website is hosted on Apache, but it does not mean there is an exclusive Apache for us. Like us, there are hundreds of other website owners who are using the same Apache instance. Now all those Apache instances, if you look, they're all virtual hosts. So each website is a virtual host inside an Apache server. So virtual hosting can be done at Apache or it can be done at WebLogic also.
So in WebLogic, where do you do it?
On the
admin
console? Yeah. So here
Okay.
you have admin console. Here you have virtual host. The virtual host, you're going to create a virtual host. You give anything you want, then you set up the parameters to this virtual host. Click on the virtual host. You have 2 types of virtual hosts. One is name-based virtual host. Other one is channel-based virtual host. So the
Like
channel-based,
if you want to give a different name to the websites, which
then
are again
you're
in
going
the
to
DNS.
that's correct. You're going to use the virtual host names here.
Okay.
So you will give a name here. The DNS will resolve it to this IP port number. So that website will be handled by the corresponding managed server wherever you are doing that host name. You will target it here. If you see the targets, you will select the corresponding server. So you have created a virtual host, then you are targeting it to, let's say MNG1 you are targeting. So the virtual host is actually targeted to MNG1. Like that.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, any other questions, guys? Okay, if you have no questions, we'll stop it here for today. I'll see you tomorrow. We'll talk about GMS. Tomorrow is what, Christmas. You guys are okay, right? Tomorrow is not Christmas. Tomorrow is not Christmas? Tomorrow is Christmas.
No, I think it is day after.
Is it? Yeah, for you it's day after, for
No,
me.
not tomorrow. Okay.
Okay, I think, okay, whatever it is. So we're going to have a session tomorrow. I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.